And so, today we're going to have a little short history on perfume, so you can understand the context of this smell and tell on Chanel No. 5. I'll talk about some intriguing facts about the sense of smell, some of which you may know and some which might be new. I'll talk about olfactory intention in Chanel No. 5. And what I mean by that is, when there is a design in imagination, for that to manifest in the physical takes a special relationship between the person who has the dream and the person who has to interpret it. And the perfumer is the interpreter, and the dreamer now, a lot of the times, is someone in fashion, an artist, a chef, another type of creative person. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the chemistry of Chanel No. 5, because that is the magic that makes it timeless today. And the design of the bottle remains timeless, so we'll get into that. And then, as a short fact, why babies smell like Chanel No. 5. I was interviewed by the New York Times on the smell of babies, and I talked about it there, but it bears mentioning, because it's true, but it's not. Okay, so the world's first perfumer was a woman. And the reason why we know this is because there's a cuneiform tablet. The woman's name was Tapuri Belet Kalim, and she worked with materials like calmus, cypress, myrrh, and balsam, and she used water extraction and distillation. Distillation comes from the Arab world. We can thank the Arab world for math, for some architecture, for science and mathematics, and many other beautiful things. So perfume comes from the word perfumum, which means through smoke. And the first perfume is incense. So that came from Egypt. So perfumery doesn't have its origins in France, but its commercial origins as a product worn by Westerners, its origins are in France. And people who used incense believed that when they lit it and the smoke, sort of billowed out in patterns, that their prayers were being carried to the gods. It's very meditative, and I think anyone that likes to use incense today or has seen it in church ritual, especially in Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic ritual, can find it very calming and insightful. Materials used in incense making are still used in perfumery today, and some of the common ones are frankincense, myrrh, sandalwood, benzoin. Benzoin is a gum, resin, so is frankincense and myrrh, and sandalwood is what it sounds like. An interesting fact about sandalwood, it was over-harvested, no fair trade, and for about 10 years you didn't see Indian sandalwood in perfumery. And then in Australia, they had a different type of sandalwood that started to appear in perfumery. They're very different. To me, when I smell one against the other, one is just beautiful and rich and has multiple layers, and one it's a little linear. The good news is that there are better practices now with sandalwood. You can get Indian sandalwood, but the industry is not using it as much because it's too expensive. So greed drove the price up when it was unfairly harvested, and greed is driving the price up because no one's using it now when it's fairly harvested. And Shonda will talk about that at the university, at a smell and tell there. Catherine de Medici is responsible for introducing perfumery as we know it through the French. Her personal perfumer was Rene Florentine. She was the wife of Henri, Duc d'Orléans, and her tastes influenced the court and society at the time. So de Medici really liked Spanish leather gloves. And they were popular in Italy, but they had a smell, and anyone who's ever smelled like new leather that's tan, that doesn't have like that additive to sort of, calm down that strong smell from the tannins, it's a little offensive. So she turned to her perfumer and said, "Can you do something about these gloves? Because maybe you could perfume them." And he did, and more were made, and he began to sell them. And then this idea of having something fragranced on your hands to being on your skin, if you take off a scented leather glove, your hands are going to smell. So the next thought is, where else can I put this perfume? And that's kind of what happened. And voila, we have French perfumery. So a little bit about Rene Florentine. Even though he was helpful, he was a little unsavory. A lot of perfumers were also poisoners in this time in history. And so he knew how to vanquish enemies, and he used gloves to do it. And because they were scented, you couldn't tell there was poison there. And he made quite a living, and he had to live with his acts and actions, but he's a little infamous because of that. So in terms of the ingredients, the film that you had seen, the Robertet film, you saw that, you saw flowers being harvested, you saw them in the containers being processed. The microclimate of Grasse is very special. So you get really beautiful lavenders, beautiful roses, beautiful jasmines, orange blossom in particular, which can also be used as a flavor. All of these can, actually, are all there, and the best ones are there. Chanel owns its own rose and jasmine fields. No one else gets their hands on it. And so, like with wine, you have a grape, and there's a vintage and a terroir. The same is true of ingredients in perfumery. A rose from one year in that field can be stupendous. It can be great, but not quite like the other, and it's molecular. The differences, come from the soil, the sun, the rain, and all of these things. So there's a variety of jasmine that Chanel uses, and jasmine's kind of tricky in perfumery. There's different kinds. There's Sambac and Grandiflora. And Sambac is what we call indolic in perfumery. It smells a little horsey and funky, and Grandiflorum is cleaner. Now, I like the funky when it's blended with other things, because perfumery is like cooking. Sometimes the way things smell on their own are different than they are in combination. So we will smell the jasmine and the rose from Chanel No. 5 as separate entities, and they are beautiful. This room is going to smell amazing. It's too bad the people who watch this film won't be able to smell it, but that's coming too. People have this interesting response to the sense of smell when we're talking about the art of perfumery, and a gentleman named Richard La Gallienne wrote this in The Romance of Perfume, and I will read it. Perfume would seem to be one of the elements, one of the original secrets of the universe, how it gets into flowers and certain uncouth creatures, as for instance ambergris in the whale, or civet in the civet cat of Abyssinia, or musk once more in the Florida alligator, is a hidden process of the divine chemistry, and why it affects us as it does, no philosopher has yet explained. Literally, it belongs to those invisible powers whose influence is in the incalculable and as yet unknown. So for Monsieur La Gallienne, it is a mystery. For perfumer Ernest Beau, who made Chanel No. 5, it's chemistry. One has to rely on chemists to find new aroma chemicals for creating new original notes. In perfumery, the future lies primarily in the hands of the chemists, and he is right, and I'll tell you why. Any material, whether it is created in a lab and synthetic or it's natural, is organic chemistry. Molecules are molecules. But the tenacity and the performance of things that are created in the lab can do amazing things when they're combined with naturals. And Ernest Beau had a fondness for a category of materials called aldehydes. So smell is processed by the limbic system and the cerebral cortex. The limbic system processes memory and emotion, and the cerebral cortex is all about words. So you get hit in the memory and emotion place when you smell something first, before you have the capacity to have a word for something. So if you understand this, when you're having an experience smelling something, you can have the patience to be more of an objective observer, I would say, like a scientist in a lab. Like, you're not looking for an outcome. What is this thing? What is it? What does it mean to me? And you know how your brain works now, because I just told you a little secret. So if you practice this, your capacity to smell and smell well will get better, unless you have a neurodegenerative disease. Then that's a whole other story. So scientists at Rockefeller University just last year discovered that human beings can smell 1 trillion odors. This was through an algorithm. It's solid science. We have been told, and I had been saying in earlier Smell and Tells 2 years ago, that we smell 10,000 things, because that was the science, and apparently that was radically wrong. That tells you how important the sense is in the human organism. Olfactory cells are the only sensory cells that regenerate throughout your lifetime. And loss of sense of smell is one of the earliest signs of neurodegenerative disease. And I like to talk about this a little bit, not to scare you so much, but to make you aware that in the aging process, it's natural to lose some of your capacity to smell. This is life. However, a radical change will affect the way you perceive flavor, because smell plus taste equals flavor. So if you have someone in your family who's older, who stops eating as much, or they stop enjoying food, they start to lose weight, and you take them to the doctor, make sure the doctor asks them about their capacity to distinguish smells and say taste, even though that's not the technical definition, right? Because flavor sits between those two. Chances are the smell loss could be related to Parkinson's, could be related to dementia, could be related to Alzheimer's. Now, the fact that I know this, and I'm sharing this with you, is because science is catching up with something we never knew. Smell has always been the bastard stepchild of the senses, so it's never gotten a lot of attention. It's getting a lot of attention now because smell is memory, and memory is identity. You lose your sense of smell, and it's the sign of losing your mind. It's simple but profound. So the sense of smell is designed for survival, human propagation, and it detects danger and pleasure. And without this, life could be a little difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. It's the gateway to memory. And if you think about the fact that you can smell 1 trillion smells, think about all the memories you can still make from now till, when the book on your life novel is closed. Olfactory intention in Chanel number 5. This is an interesting slide because this starts to show, what was she dreaming, Chanel, when she was thinking, I want to make this fragrance that doesn't exist, and I have this notion of what I think it is. And her notion was, I want something that smells of freshly scrubbed skin. Now, when I hear that, I think of a loofah, because, I was a kid in the 70s and they were big. But what did she mean? So she had other intentions around that freshly scrubbed skin, which was that women in the 20s were becoming liberated, uncorseted, so to speak. And she wanted something that wasn't very floral or a singular floral essence, which was very popular at the time and was really a stereotype of what a woman's perfume is. And so Ernest Beau did his magic and used some aroma chemistry, and she was tickled. She said, this is what I was waiting for, a perfume that smells like nothing else, a perfume with the scent of a woman. And I have to agree that today, even with the regulation and reformulation on this scent, it's still true. The smell of something that's different is tricky. So for a perfumer who's starting to mess around to create something that doesn't yet exist, because this is the example every time, when you smell something that's new, it's a little jarring. Now, because the sense of smell is attached to, to your safety, if something smells like it's going to be unpleasant, then the fear part of your brain kicks in. And so you can almost have a panic attack sometimes if you smell something that's either offensive or just reminds you of something and you can't kind of pinpoint the memory, but you kind of flip out a little bit about it. So as a perfumer, this element of surprise can be profound and disruptive, and the perfumer has to sort of sit there and judge over time, is this right? Is it combining with other things, or is this just crazy and I have to start over again? So Chanel's willingness to embrace aroma chemistry, which at that time was starting, right? It was just natural materials mostly. They were bolstered and held by musk, by ambergris, and these other animalic ingredients, which we use artificial versions of today because they're more humane. She was open to that, and because she was open to science, her art became manifest. So what Ernest Beau did was very interesting. So aldehydes are a class of molecules that have fatty, waxy, floral aroma components. Some of them are a little citrusy, like a grapefruit or like orange. Some have a little bit of an amber element to them. And the fatty part sometimes sets people off. So some people love aldehydic fragrances. Some people, so-so, not their bag. So he decided he would overdose one particular aldehyde. Whether this was intentional or not is subject to a lot of scrutiny because they think that his assistant accidentally put in too much C11 in the formula. And we heard a story in perfumery school that he yelled at his assistant for making such a horrible mistake, but Chanel liked it so much that the mistake became the world's best-selling perfume here in 2015. We're still wearing it. So another material, which we are going to smell, that was overdosed in another perfume is called dihydromercenol. Dihydromercenol is used in laundry detergents, and some aldehydes are too. It was used to create Davidoff for men. Since I'm being filmed, I can't tell you the true story of how it was formulated, but I'll say it when the cameras are off. It's very funny, and it involves a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue, and that's all I'll say. So there's another beautiful material that perfumer Maurice Roussel used called cashmeran. It's one of the most expensive ingredients in perfumery. It was created at IFF, and he used it in something called Dante Bras, which I highly recommend as a fragrance, but the price tag's kind of steep. It smells beautiful. And I believe there's no gender attached to perfume. So if you like the way it smells and the way it smells on you, just, wear it. Just kind of to go back a little bit on aroma chemicals. So the few that started to move around during the time that Chanel was formed, right before it actually were coumarin, which is found in tonka bean. If you've ever smelled pipe tobacco, then you know the smell of tonka bean, right? That's that vanillic kind of beautiful smell. Something called heliotropin, which if you've smelled Play-Doh, it's that almondy vanilla smell. And vanillin, which is a molecule found in vanilla. When you buy artificial vanilla in a store, you're either smelling vanillin that was derived from the paper process at cutting trees or from petrochemicals. Now, when I say that, don't get scared. It doesn't matter where the molecule came from. Vanillin is vanillin. You don't have to take my word for it, but it's chemistry. I like to say that because I often hear things when I read articles like, oh, that has chemicals. Well, we're all walking chemistry sets. Everything is chemistry. If it's artificially made, then the propensity for, that sort of sonic boom, speaking from an olfactorial, point of view, like with the aldehyde, that exists. But you also have that with some naturals. But aroma chemicals are meant to have impact because they're used to support other things in structure. So Chanel's desire for a perfume that smelled of freshly scrubbed skin worked because Ernest Beau also did a couple of other things. He added 2 other aldehydes. So he had this sort of trio. Now what was interesting is Chanel wanted freshly scrubbed skin. In Beau's mind, his idea of freshness appeared in the landscape. And they were lakes and rivers in the Arctic Circle, where he was for some time, actually. I think it was during a war. I don't remember exactly. So all the different aldehydes have different qualities. Just to go back to this molecule, from one to the other. And you've smelled probably the most beautiful one. So the key natural ingredients that are used in Chanel No. 5, besides aldehydes, are jasmine, neroli, orange blossom, starting to see the effect of what grows in grass, rose, sandalwood, tonka bean, vanilla, vetiver, which is a grass, ylang-ylang, which if you know the smell of bain de soleil suntan gel, that's kind of like ylang-ylang, and other ingredients because, of course, recipes are secret. So timelessness in a bottle is a very adequate way to describe what a Chanel No. 5 bottle looks like, because when you look at its starting point in 1921, it's like a flask, and it was modeled after a flask. And as it moves along, all of a sudden it gets a jeweled top when you get to 1986, which is that is actually still the model for what the bottle looks like. So I believe that the shape of things to come can last forever if some design thinking is applied. And when form and function are aligned in the right way, you have timelessness. So when you think about the bottle, it has clean-cut lines, and it showcases what's inside. So rather than the bottles of Rene Lalique, which were very intricate and had, forms and curves and flowers in women's bodies, all around them, the focus was on the outside of the bottle. For Chanel, it was very minimalist. It was what was inside. So the simplicity of the bottle is interesting because inside of it is an abstract bouquet. It doesn't need the ornament of other perfume bottles to define it. And it's a quality that people still adhere themselves to. And if you look at what independent perfumers or even large brands are doing now when they're making bottles, you will see bottles that have that kind of showcase feature. They're never going to go away. They're ephemeral. So there's a reason for the look of these bottles. So pharmacy really is the source of it in France because remedies, were in bottles that were shaped like the first flask you saw on the earlier slide. And then the glass bottles that contained medicine had a functional association, but the pharmacies also made aromatic preparations. They were actually the first places perfumes were made. And good smells were considered therapeutic. That's why the pharmacists did that. That was aromatherapy at that time because there was no proper sanitation and no proper hygiene, frankly. So people stunk. There's no other way to say it. So the design of an apothecary bottle is what's influenced Chanel No. 5 design. And now I'm going to tell you why Chanel No. 5 smells like babies. Scented talcum powder was a form of deodorant in the 18th century, and it was also used to freshen wigs. If you notice now when you look at the market, there are dry shampoos, in a can that gets sprayed. That's powder. Some different ingredients, same thing. powdering babies is part of a pampering ritual. That has existed since, talcum powder has been used for that purpose. So Johnson & Johnson actually borrowed the chemistry from Chanel No. 5 when they designed the scent for the baby shampoo. So if you smell, Erin, if you could, there is a bar of Johnson & Johnson's baby soap that I brought in that can get passed around, which has the same smell. And put this in your mind, because when you smell Chanel No. 5, you'll be shocked. So if you're broke, just get Johnson & Johnson's baby shampoo in the baby bar, and don't worry about it. You'll smell like Chanel No. 5, a little. All right, so I wore it today because it was like dress rehearsal. And on me and on my skin, at some point it goes to that elang portion where it reminds me. So when I was a kid, I lived in the Bronx, and we would go on our roof in the summer to get tan and use reflectors and all those things that are really bad for you. And we used Bain de Soleil suntan gel, which had no SPF, virtually. And I just remember the feeling of the sun. And that's it's very solar to me. And actually, it took me a while to like Chanel No. 5. So I'll tell you a story, and you can read about it on the blog. This is a good one. When I was a little kid, my parents were immigrants. My mother's from Israel, but her family via Iraq. My father was a Holocaust survivor, and his family was from Poland. So my parents read, but they were immigrants. Their English wasn't so good. So we got the New York Post at home, and I needed the New York Times when I had to do reports on, that required newspapers. And so there was a woman in my building named Mrs. Glassman. Mrs. Glassman was about close to 70, very refined. She was a widow. I think her husband may have been a lawyer. I know his name was Bernard because it was always, Mrs. Bernard Glassman on her mail and stuff like that. And she wore a beautiful red lipstick, had her hair up like a fierce bun, and had this, I don't know, she was exquisite. But she was a little scary because she was very strict. And she had 2 dogs. One dog was named Nosy and one was named Chico, and Nosy sang. And I know this because I would go to Mrs. Glassman's house on the weekend and borrow the Sunday Times so I could do current events. And one day she invited me in and had me sit at her table. And so this, apartments in the Bronx where I lived were very interesting. So this building was a pre-war building, had a sunken living room. She had like burgundy sort of flocked wallpaper in this room where there was a mahogany table and, crystal. And I was just like, I was mesmerized. My house didn't look like that where I grew up. Our apartment was not like that. So I would sit down, and this one day she said, "Would you like to have tea?" I thought, sure, I loved tea. So she gave it to me in some fancy china. And I'm looking, and near the crystal, I see a bottle of perfume. And she always had a smell. And it was Chanel No. 5. I didn't know it. But on her, the aldehydes got a little sour, and it was a little like old lady smell to me at the time. So that was Mrs. Glassman. So I saw the bottle, and I asked her if I could smell it. And she told me the story about, I guess it was a gift from her husband when he was alive. He gave it to her, and she let me smell it. And we're drinking tea and having social tea biscuits that Nabisco made at that time, which are horrible now because they took out the bad fat, so they don't taste good anymore. And she told me the story of why she likes this perfume so much. And so I went through the rest of my life as I got older, and I was like addicted to perfume at 10. I was buying things in department stores with my allowance money. This is the truth. So I never quite liked Chanel No. 5. And then the company sent me a bottle. I requested it because I was working on a story, and I just thought, I need to practice what I preach about being objective when you're smelling and really try this thing. So I actually wore it during the polar vortex, and I had an awakening because the aldehydes, that crisp part of it, when it's like almost sub-zero weather, comes out like the most beautiful thing. And I don't know why. It probably has to do with the rate of evaporation, that it's slower when it's colder. And I fell in love with this thing, and then all of a sudden I could smell the ylang, and I thought of being on the roof in the sun, and I'm like, how could I hate Chanel No. 5? I'm an idiot. And I finished the bottle, and I have another one. So I came to love that, but I hated it, actually. I hated aldehydes for a long time. And then I don't know, I think one of the things that perfumery training has taught me is not just how to describe the invisible, but how to be objective and just appreciate something for what it is, whether I like it or not. And God knows we know people like that. It's like, it's like it gives you good life skills. And also, if you're a researcher, no matter what your discipline is, you're always trying to discover something that doesn't exist or make something that doesn't exist. And I feel like I would like to see, and I'm working on it, we'll see what happens, the training that I was given being taught in higher education. Because the method, it's called the Jean Carl method, it's a real discipline, is something that teaches you things that will stay with you for the rest of your life. It also, you'll notice, right, so look at how many people are sitting here and we start to talk about things. The hesitancy to say what you think about something is usually because you think you're wrong. And the truth is you're never wrong because you're measuring things against your own experience. And once you know that, then people are a little bit more freer to speak. And if something hits someone, like, that woman said, oh my God, this is the perfume that my aunt wears. Like, when those personal things come in, the conversations get deeper and deeper. And those of you that have come to a few of these have seen some of it. The patchouli one was very interesting last time. We got a lot of, because patchouli is an ingredient that you love or hate. And what people learned in that experience was that they hate it because they've smelled really bad patchouli. What they also got to smell, which was really cool, was a biosynthetic molecule that comes from fermented yeast. And it's a molecule that's in patchouli. It's also used for cancer drugs. It smells gorgeous. Was never smelled outside of a lab by anyone who wasn't in a lab coat or in the industry. Happened here at the Ann Arbor Library. So thank you.